Good evening, everyone. This is Just Vine and Kansuki Dynasty, streaming live from Rune Siren to our main channel 2-MK with our full permission. Today we will be going over SakuraBot and all of her inputs, the purpose behind them, and showing you a little bit of how the bot interacts with various characters. So, SakuraBot is a focus, punish, awareness, and neutral game spacing bot. She is a lot like Ken in that regard. The intention of this bot is to help you train your mind to identify similar looking situations separately and do the appropriate punishes for each situation without just using a default. It also trains the same sort of tendencies in the neutral game. SakuraBot can be considered therefore to be a harder version of KenBot with only slightly more difficult inputs for most people. She will not push as much in neutral and will not jump in as often or as predictably, but it is still intended to help train reactions, as well as helping players to get used to abilities of new characters they have available before players move on to other bots or katas. In order to take maximum advantage of the free week of Sakura offered with the release of Street Fighter AE, this bot's more complex potential has intentionally not been explored, so we will possibly be coming up with another version in the future, but for now, while she's free, we wanted to give people a way to get right to training the Sakura matchup basics, as well as the neutral game spacing for some of the newer players that will be joining us in AE. And honestly, given the changes in AE, everyone could use a neutral game reminder and tune-up. So, while we do not have all of her tools involved, SakuraBot is definitely going to address that particular issue. And honestly, she is relatively easy to input compared to most of our bots. This bot's inputs have quite a lot of leniency, but the bot will change relatively heavily as you go from lenient to optimal inputs, so be sure to keep this in mind when playing. We recommend starting with lenient, acceptable inputs and occasionally attempting to re-enter them between sessions or when you feel the situation is not training you in the aspect of the matchup that you really want. Due to this, the variant data and annotations that we will later be giving throughout the stream will be more detailed for the different versions of the bot, for as if you have followed us in the past, you know that these bots usually have an easy, normal, advanced, and expert level difficulty. So, let us get to going over the inputs here. So this input is fairly simple, as you can see. It does a simple target combo.
Well, not quite a target combo, but it does do a combo.
And it is one of the more simple in terms of usage inputs. But the main purpose of this input is mainly to create an ambiguous situation that will cause a mild amount of damage if the player tries to whiff punish incorrectly by creating said ambiguous whiff situation, and a situation where it is easy for the bot to cancel out of more useful things. In addition, it has Well, no, it seems to be missing a held medium punch input.
You're not seeing it there, and this is actually a good refresher that the medium punch is being held there, and if we reset the input, you will get to see it again. So restart battle, and you get to see that medium input. But because that medium input was held down to the end, the game thinks that it is still held down when it comes through again, and it doesn't get pressed when it crosses from action 1 into action 1 again. So while you don't see it in the inputs, that's actually correct. Except the first time through.
And this will be a common theme throughout SakuraBot's inputs, since we do not want her V-skill going off too frequently, but it also allows the V-skill to happen a lot more unpredictably, and therefore is a little better for training the pressure that you would face in a real match, as well as making her movement in neutral a little less predictable. So I think that explains this one for the most part. So this next one, again, is a fairly simple input. It is just light kick buffering into a Shoryuken. Now, if you are unfamiliar with what buffering means, basically it means that if you go up to Sakura, she will do her Shoryuken, but otherwise will only be hitting the light kick. This input is mainly to create the variable punish situation, and it is not really more complex than that. It also contains the held medium punch that we were discussing earlier, to allow for a more variable V-skill timing, as we previously discussed. However, the light kick also ensures that the bot has a lighter punish for players who are a little too overcommitted to their forward movement or their action in neutral, and to keep their neutral game a little honest, not bullying her with slower attacks or trying to punish her up close with frequent button mashing. Now, this input is the main defensive input. It not only allows for a throw tech, but it also allows for a SakuraBot to have a decent neutral button and to punish players who are overly defensive. Now, while that is -7, I believe, up close, in the neutral game... Ah, right, we can actually show you that. Now, while it is -7 up close, at further ranges, since it is a quite long button, it is capable of hitting you safely on block from further distances. This isn't true for all characters, but for many who don't have as long as buttons for punishing, it can be quite frustrating. But for players who don't have those kinds of good buttons, you will need to train your neutral to be able to handle such situations on many characters, not just Sakura. And honestly, it's a decent button in the neutral for stopping approaches. Now, this one is the main V-skill input, but it is also the input that creates the most variation in her movement, as it has a hidden dash and a hidden jump. This also allows SakuraBot to have a lot more possible approaches, ensuring that the players learn as many different situations as possible given the tools currently available to the bot. It is also the main factor in forcing the player to learn the neutral, as the variation in Sakura's movement can change the threat of all other inputs. And lastly, input 5. This is probably the most busy of all the inputs. Firstly, it gives her a quick rise, ensuring her knockdown is variable, which also gives her a while also giving her a slightly variable zoning tool. Additionally, it has the ability to give her both her standing heavy kick, a threatening and relatively safe tool in neutral, as well as a few situations for her B trigger to occur which modify the behavior of the bot, as well as to some degree making the variance in what is punishable on Sakura and varying what punishes you can use, as her EX and V trigger Shookens are crush counterable, but her normal medium one is not. The final piece of this puzzle here, in this very busy input, is the very end. We put in a hidden, well, not necessarily hidden, but a quarter circle back input that should be ended immediately after you do the input, as if you were inputting a special move. This allows SakuraBot to have her Tatsu-like move, and it also allows a lot more variation in what she can do due to that. So when combined with other actions, especially in the neutral situation, she can cancel out of a heavy punch, I believe, into her Tatsu, which actually trades with a lot of neutral buttons. Or outright dominates them. So it's yet another piece that adds to SakuraBot's good neutral game. So now we'll put on the full bot, and I will go and I will allow Kansuki Dynasty to go over the point system while I play SakuraBot a bit.
Alright then, as this bot is designed more or less to help you differentiate between similar looking situations and make sure you have the right reaction, as well as keeping track of a little bit of your neutral defense and such. The point system obviously reflects that. The first option you have for getting points on SakuraBot in her easiest available mode is simply to anti-air her, whether that's her jump in or her V skill, it doesn't really matter. But then once you get out of the easiest stage, that's no longer available. Your second option for getting points is the main one that we have alluded to thus far. It is the fact that you have to use a different punish on her medium Shoken versus her EX or V trigger Shoken, since the EX and V trigger are crush counterable and the medium is not. So, for the second and main way of getting points for this bot, you have to be ready for that situation and land the correct punish based on what type of Shoken Sakura did. With the interesting caveat that SakuraBot herself is going to get a point every time you use the wrong one. So you can't just try to punish only one sort of thing or such, because you'll eventually mix that up. And obviously with all of our bots, first person to 10 points wins, and if you die, you lose. Then after that point option, you have another way of getting points, which you can try at the same time, of course. And that is that when you are in neutral with Sakura, trying to get a full combo off of her, starting from your crouch medium kick or crouch medium punch. Although for some characters it can be a little different, they'll have more options for this. And the notes for all that will be on our website when we release SakuraBot's page and details sometime later this evening. That is our next task after stream. The final option is that Sakura has a forward dash hidden in there, and just finally remember which input that is specifically. But if you can take that specific dash, and on reaction you can interrupt that dash, you can get a point from that. It usually comes after her overhead, but it's not going to come after every overhead. So that can hurt as well. Now, since SakuraBot is one of our bots that has the most variance, possibly the most variance available out of all of our easier level bots, there are a couple of variants in point system as well, in addition to all of the minor details in the inputs that we may talk about a little more now, or we may talk about on our page when we release the bot. So if you want to train meter awareness, you can set your own CA gauge to normal, which is what we're actually demonstrating here. It's a slightly harder variant of the bot than the default one, but it's something you can upgrade to as soon as you're comfortable. And then if you want to train defensive awareness, Sakura gets a point whenever she hits you with her overhead, which will mean that it's much more difficult to block things necessarily if you block for too long. Gives you definitely another thing to focus on, while you're still trying to get points and everything else. And obviously it means that you're going to take a bit more damage.
Anyway, I've been noticing a few things while facing SakuraBot here. First of all, it appears that her overhead can actually flat out beat Bison's scissor kick due to its hitbox. It's not too surprising given the way Sakura has always been built, but it does mean that Bison will have to respect her a little bit and come up with ways of approaching her in a little less of a bully fashion that Bison tended to have in Season 2. The other thing that I am noting is that she throw techs a lot. The timings that you would throw her seem to line up with where we have her throw tech in it. This isn't true for every bot we have, I don't think.
Although we do make some effort to put the text where you're going to throw.
Yeah.
It's not always necessarily possible.
But this does feel a lot more natural, and honestly, she feels really strong defensively because of the timing of when her throw is. And as you may have noted, you have to move in response to Sakura quite a bit. Oh right, that no longer chains. I'm gonna have to get used to that. Oh, that doesn't chain either, huh? Noted. But while we have this bot as specifically a neutral spacing and whiff punish focus, she still is pretty decent at making you work on your hit confirms.
Now, as Sakura is one of the bots with the most input variance, and one of our bots that how cleanly or how well you enter the inputs gives you a good way of upgrading your bot slowly as you improve or as you train. We are going to be making a few attempts through our screen to actually improve one of the inputs that we did not have perfect ourselves on our first try through. Input number 3. So a few times during our stream we'll probably be making new attempts to enter that with a little more perfect, and just take out a mistake I made on our first pass through. It shouldn't change the overall nature of the input too much, but it will affect slightly how it interacts with other things. So whenever Vine is comfortable, she can hand that controller over and I will take occasional attempt or two to put that in correctly.
Bah. All right. So let's give it a shot here.
Alright, so we have action number 3 here. That is the throw. It has a couple of hidden buttons. I don't know if Vine is terribly interested one way or another in her V skill. Actually, I'm not going to do that. So we have it's a little too early of an end.
But you really do have a lot more time than you would normally expect from an input to put this in. You want to end the input right as the body of your opponent hits the ground. And her back throw is a fairly decently long animation.
almost got it, but I got it backwards. So what I'm trying right now is not the perfect input, it is just a better version of the standard input. As you may be aware of, if we have... we generally have acceptable and perfect inputs for each bot, so that you can scale up your difficulty or details along the way.
And honestly, if you're in bronze or super bronze, you're not too familiar with many inputs aside from your own character. Honestly, as we kept doing more and more bots, I found myself personally getting better at executions just as a general thing because they required so many weird timings in some instances. So my mind developed a little more flexibility as a result. Which honestly is the biggest thing in the way of some of these inputs. It's not necessarily that they're hard, your brain just feels weird about them. Like this particular input. It's not that going into from back throw into forward medium punch, forward medium kick, and then waiting till the animation completes is technically difficult. But your mind might complain a lot or a little bit, depending on how used you are to different inputs and different ways of doing things. But you'll find that a lot in SakuraBot. She tends to have that effect on oneself.
Almost. I will not make too many more attempts here, don't worry. I put a hidden jump in there, I can't have that.
That would make her way too jumpy, honestly. As you could see from my earlier play, SakuraBot really doesn't jump that much, despite having an entire move basically dedicated to making her airborne. This was intentional, mainly to make it so that the anti-air point was rarer, and the focus on it would be more surprised and more fitting of an actual match.
The timing on that isn't quite perfect, but let's see how it goes for now.
And honestly, something I've found through my recent training efforts is that relaxing is probably one of the larger parts of getting a correct confirmation into a combo. If you're busy worried about getting the combo in, you'll be far less likely to have a relaxed enough input. Oof. Huh. So that is the anti-air and crush counters. Noted.
The back medium punch? It's
No,
quite
the heavy punch.
Oh yes, yes. It's quite a nice button. I'm looking forward to hitting everyone with it, as you might expect.
Some of my combos feel a little off. And I know they didn't change that much frame data on Bison. So I wonder if the rumors are true and there is some change to the input lag in the game. Yep, didn't wait for her to get to the ground. Oh man. But that's what I was talking about with that ambiguous situation. But yeah, you really... Sakura's buttons, the way I personally have been experiencing them, you really do have to respect them. It's part of the design of the character, but her hitboxes definitely are fairly large. And as such, it means that while you might trade for a lot of situations, for a lot more situations than other characters, you'll get punished a lot more. I've been trying to move to the scissor kick on Bison the past 2 days, since it seems like the way they want Bison players to change is to rely a little bit less on burst and basically reward them for using scissor kick a little bit more. And this isn't exactly totally fitting my style, in some ways it does fit it in others. So I'm just mostly figuring out how that feels at the moment. Ugh. She will punish that whiff though, that's for sure. Which is honestly the story with a lot of this, but if both players are playing a good neutral game, you'll see a lot of damage come off of said situations, where a player finally gets the edge on the other in their spacing and manages to use the player's expected reaction with their normal whiff button, and it leads to lots of damage because they have trained to confirm off of those situations. And that's honestly what SakuraBot is all about. But yeah, that really is Akuma-ish timing for that Shouken. So we'll be moving to Cammy here in a sec. Probably after this next match. That's not safe. Whew. I'm definitely going to be getting a lot of benefit from SakuraBot, not just because it's good at training the neutral, but I've been working on, before AE, deprogramming some of my autopiloted defensive responses, which lead to me both being a little too predictable and my opponents getting a lot of free damage. And they really didn't need it. Since her buttons have such big hitboxes, they punish a lot of the things that I was accustomed to, such as Bison's standing light kick and his crouching light punch. And the neutral to sort of keep my opponent at bay. Anyway, let's head on over to Cammy.
Alright. There is my first defeat. Almost in the first moment, SakuraBot gets a point from me. Because I used the wrong punish trying to crush counter something that wasn't crush counterable. There's another one. And so this is one of the things that SakuraBot is going to be good for. For those of you new players, or just refreshing yourself who are starting out with Ken, or other, perhaps even other such bots to you, or whoever, who do their dragon punches, and you want to punish those, you get to crush counter, then you have your crush counter combo. Everybody's used to that. But that does not work on all of Sakura's options, as we discussed and as the point system implied. Ouch. And so I've definitely been having this problem. As you may have seen, we were testing out our prototype SakuraBot before we quite finalized her. And so that's something I'll be training on as well. Not to mention anti-airs. Doesn't do it often, but it's sort of like a real match in that way. Oops. So something just fine was not focusing on quite as much. I'm going to try and get a little more often. The point for hitting her with Crouching medium kick or crouching medium punch in neutral. No point there, unfortunately, as I did a punish off block. Which is honestly a little bit of an interesting point, as Sakura's hurt boxes are a little deceptive to some degree, and you might find yourself whiffing or just needing to spend a little more time than usual getting used to the ranges where she is safe. Especially when, just because certain of her moves pull them back or move them around a little bit. So one of the benefits of the bot, obviously, is practice keeping your focus in all these places at once. Because you can't be in range for the neutral stuff. And still do everything else without definitely having to worry about what you're paying attention to. Oops. No point there, wasn't neutral. Not to mention you're going to get hit with that just randomly sometimes. So you really do have to be on point and careful with what you're doing regardless. I didn't try to crush counter, but I did a punish that doesn't work despite it. So I'm getting myself a little practice with that crush counter, and then a little practice reminding myself when not to do it. And so, while Sakura is, at least in her 1.0 form, since we have not yet learned all the special Sakura tech, and wanted to get you something for her free week while you all get to try her. Sakura 1.0 is currently one of our beginner-ish, easier bots. We have some large-scale difficulty throughout our inventory. But Sakura is one of the easier ones in this current form. But it's always useful to have even some of these sorts of slightly easier bots available to you just when you have something specific you want to practice that the particular bot is good for. Like this. Minus 1 point, or rather 1 point to Sakura there. And so there are some characters who only their EXDP is punishable. Sakura now, obviously. I believe Ibuki is one of them.
Crush counterable, you mean?
Yes, I do mean crush counterable. Don't even want to know what I did say. But yes, DPs are crush counterable, and so it is something that you're going to need to learn, at least for certain matchups in this game. So it's nice to have that here. So it helps when you find yourself in an unfamiliar matchup, or there's just that one weird feature that one character has, or just when you have something specific like this that you need to practice to improve your game overall. Other thing SakuraBot has definitely taught me to watch out for as well is she can do on landing into that EXDP somewhat reliably in certain situations. So if you're used to anti-airing in certain ways or challenging jump-ins certain ways, it can break through some bad habits you may have as well. A little space here. So now it's just a minor break. Let's take another chance at recording that input 3 again and see if I manage to do it any better this time around. Or maybe I'll even manage to do it worse and we can find out how that goes instead. So one of the advanced inputs for this bot is that if you can do a kick first plink of this throw, it helps out the way she uses her V skill a little bit. And so I'm going to at least try for that a couple of times, although I will not spend too long on it right away. One thing I'm doing to make my life a little easier given the specific control scheme I'm doing is I'm actually, rather than using the medium kick button for that forward throw, or that forward medium kick, I'm using, since I'm holding the medium punch and that's getting in my way a little bit, I'm actually using a V-skill button I have, since holding that down will also break the punch on there. Which is a little trick you can use, or consider other variants of, that normally we use to have actions do specific things over transitions, but you can also use to input the bots yourself. Now that might have been good, but the timing was off, and I don't know if I actually released the kick button. getting the plink so far, so now I just have to put the rest of the bot in. Or the rest of the action together.
Yeah, practicing little pieces of the action is usually a pretty good way to eventually get it down just right. If you try to do the entire thing at once, at first anyway, you can tend to end up getting a little frustrated very quickly if it's a input you just aren't quite able to put in since it's different from what you're normally used to. It's a little similar to practicing combos in a way. If you can't get the entire combo at once, you can do it in little chunks until you can string all of the pieces together.
Problem I run into is when I'm holding down one thing, I want to hold down everything. And my brain just doesn't get it quite through that I need to let go of the medium kick. Or that I need to wait longer.
Yeah, as I was saying before, relaxing is definitely a key to getting this sort of thing in.
Yes, works for combos, definitely works for these inputs. It's very easy to get tense while you're doing this, but sometimes you just gotta chill out, take a moment. You've seen me do that a little bit too. And so let's see what happens here. Oh, that one. And now the real deal. Gotta let her stun wear off a little bit. Pretty sure that medium punch does need to be forward, unfortunately. No, I got two of them. And I ended that a little early, but let's roll with it and see what it does to the bot. And so y'all can have a little experience with just how that goes. And honestly, so can I, since I have not tried the bot that way before. So, starting over, let's see what we got here. As Cammy, I'm so happy I can punish with that. As Sakura, I'm so disappointed I can punish with that. Yep, her V-trigger ran out. I lose a point.
But the reason why the V trigger and the EX and the normal Shoken are so useful for teaching a particular lesson is that your brain has different muscle memory for different feeling situations. And because of this, if you have a similar looking move that has a different feel to it as the move executes, it can be a good way to introduce you to that concept that your punishes rely a lot on that type of memory.
There's also something that's kind of important to be aware of and think about that would be good to mention here is that at higher levels everybody does this all the time, but when you're just starting out, it's not necessarily something you'll think of a lot. I can... so obviously you know how I'm looking for her EX and her regular and her V-triggered ones and doing them differently. Well, the EX one is very, very obvious because it turns everything orange. But, to me at least personally, the V-trigger and non-V-trigger ones are not necessarily that visually distinct. So what you can learn to do, actually, is instead of trying to react to the right one every time, you can be like... You can watch for when she activates her V-trigger and go, okay, now I know that all of them I'm going to be able to do my full crush counter on. And it takes a little bit of mental load off of you, which can be something that's very important, even if you could distinguish between them. Being able to just go, okay, good, I don't need to think about this for a little while, gives you space to think about something else during the match, and that can make a big difference.
And ideally, once you train enough with this sort of thing, which is part of what the bots are for, is it becomes secondhand. It becomes part of your background processing to begin with. So eventually, now you have that moment to think about something else entirely for the entire match, not just that one situation.
So now that I have this action 3 in that does not end quite as frequently, or quite as, that ends a bit earlier than we wanted it to. I'm at least personally noticing that it feels to me like she tends to be jumping a little bit more than she used to, and possibly using that Tatsu a little bit more. And obviously just find him comment with her impressions.
Yeah, I've also noticed that she doesn't tend to throw as much, and the medium kick becomes a lot more pronounced. So that sort of sweet spot throw teching that I was talking about before doesn't seem to be as present. It does seem to make her a little more aggressive, though. Since that Tatsu does bring her forward a lot more and puts you in a pressure situation a little more often. And honestly, her medium kick is pretty decent. Oh, that was interesting. I suppose that's one neutral punish. But something I've noticed for you, Kanzuki, is while you do tend to be decent at watching your EX meter for extending your combos and such, you do seem to not use your V trigger as often for the punish, and therefore are missing out on a bit of damage.
Yeah, I have not been trying to use either EX or V-trigger based punish combos for this yet. That is actually another thing you can work on, and something I believe Just Fine has been working on, that gives you just yet another layer you can practice and work on with the bot, adding not just perhaps priming yourself based on her V-trigger state, but your own, you pay extra attention to your own meter to make sure you maximize everything. And so I will try that a little bit, although I don't know for sure if I have any V-triggered combos on hand for fresh counters. But I'm betting that a particular one, which I will try to do here, will give me the opportunity. But for the moment, I don't have any beat meter, so it's time to wait a little bit.
Oh man. That sweep is pretty brutal.
Well, I really shouldn't be using Turn Knuckle when she's not fireballing me. But now, that's when one does it. Well, I screwed that up, but it does seem to work. Anyway, after either this round or the next one, I'm going to make yet another attempt at that input that we were referring to earlier, and see if I can't manage to show you what it looks like if I get it right in the perfect form. Or whatever form I end up coming out with this time. So let's take a look at that, and try it once more. Kick, flip, throw.
But the reason the plank is useful is for the forward medium kick, Sakura's overhead. It is a little unsafe, but having that crouching light kick can basically poke an opponent who is using a heavier button to punish said forward medium kick. So that way you don't develop the bad habit over time of, when up close, using a really strong but slow heavy button to punish the overhead. Because while -7 is quite a lot of frames, if you overextend a little bit, the opponent can just block. Or, as we're just going over right now,
let's see here. This is really giving me trouble again. I can get that throw, but then I end up holding down back for the medium punch as well, and that does not help me out. Closer. Let's try it again. Almost. Except, one thing to be aware of with this input is that I accidentally went from down back to down, down, forward, forward, rather than straight down back to forward, and unfortunately that will mean that we get Hadokens where we don't want them, so I can't even go at all with an input like that, even if I got everything else perfect. And now on the topic of relaxing, I've gotten myself a little paranoid about that again.
But yes, if you do it slower, it will do that. So don't worry about the failed plank in regard to the crouching medium kick, or crouching light kick that I was talking about earlier.
Okay, well, let's see here. That was almost right, except it was not a down back. But anyway, I will give up again shortly, and we will see what we have, and roll with that and see how it affects the bot. Or I will do it perfectly and maybe get exactly what I wanted. Let me look at that one more time to make sure it came out how I expected. And alright then. The other trick that I can use, and let me see here. Oh, alright. Well, the other trick that I could have used, if this didn't come out as correctly as it did, was that I could have just aimed to, since I was always being too fast, I could just aim to being too slow instead, and it would probably average out, or at least give me a different point to work back towards normal from. So now with everything back on, let me try and get some points. Ah, shit. She's doing her jump-ins at me and now I'm all flustered.
Well, that would be the point of the jump-ins.
It would indeed be exactly the point of the jump-ins. Ooh, yeah, she's jumping a lot more now with this exact timing. And it's definitely not overbearing, but it's now something to think about as opposed to basically just occasionally from what we had before. Ack, and that cross up. Oh, I have V-trigger, so let's try and use it. No points there because I did it as a punish. Gotta be in neutral if you want to get your points for the crouching, medium kick, medium punch attacks. And it also has to go into some form of combo. Ouch. So yeah, you can see what a big difference some of the timing makes on this. And you can just end up practicing with like 30 different versions of SakuraBot as time goes on, and you just refine things every so often. But we do have so many variants simply because they are useful. And you can just do a lot with it. Sort of leveling up as you go in that regard. But yes, in this case, as Villian notes, neutral is more so just I wasn't blocking immediately before I hit the button. Come on, choking me, will you? Not quite the combo I intended, but it is certainly a punish, I guess. As is that. Oof. Cannot punish that on the ground. Have to punish it in the air. Or rather, anti-air it in the air, I suppose. I lose a point there. Ooh, that side switches nicely now. That's interesting. Catch the backdash, I believe would probably count. Minus 1 point for me again, trying to use the heavy kick without the crush counterable.
Well, you had V-trigger, so you might have been able to...
So what I should have done... I don't know if I can cancel the heavy kick. But I can try that. I was looking to use stand heavy punch canceled instead. But I might be able to cancel the heavy kick. But at the end of the day, I know myself, I know what I tried to do, I know what that muscle memory means. And the bots aren't just about getting points, they're about fixing your bad habits. So even if you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, you can decide, maybe I don't quite deserve this point this time around. So that's only a few anti-air points so far, then.
Yes, another useful part about SakuraBot in regards to AE itself is honestly a lot of characters' anti-air buttons improved. So having a bot that makes you focus on that with an infrequent jump in is fairly useful for seeing the changes to your own anti-air and fine-tuning to the new changes to it.
Yes. And when you're practicing with SakuraBot, as you've seen, getting the timing on 3 exactly right, as opposed to a little bit early or maybe even a little bit late, can produce a jumpier or less jumpy bot to some degree for you. Not correct.
But
Ouch.
yes, as Venushika points out, the angles that Sakura can come at you from the air are quite a bit different than most characters.
She has a lot of variety in that regard with her V skill, in addition to her normal dash, and her normal jump, as well as just some of the angles of her buttons, like her jumping heavy punch, getting oddly, unusually out of the way or safe from others. Like that.
But due to all that variation, it can also be another reason why SakuraBot is good for helping you figure out what changes to your anti-air buttons are.
Ooh, I got a point for the dash. I think that's my first one.
Yeah, she doesn't really dash that often.
She's been doing it a decent amount, but it's usually in between other things and all mixed up in there, so you may not notice unless you're really watching for it.
I think I've noticed that she's started dashing slightly more once you fixed input 3.
It's actually not that she started dashing more, but it's when she's timing her dash that it's shifted a little bit, which is making that point a little more feasible to get in terms of mental balance and pressure. Just really showing again how easy it is to vary these bots based on the timing of your inputs, or occasionally re-entering one, trying to make it a little better, maybe just trying to tweak it a little bit so it just see what it shifts. And of course, while we can't do it on stream, you always have the option of closing the game without leaving training mode correctly to allow yourself to go, oops, never mind, I didn't like that, on any particular recordings. Since it will only save when you go back to a menu or main menu or character select. So I have that punish in the corner only, interestingly. Not intending to put the CA out there, getting, I guess, a little overzealous out of my muscle memory on the arrow that belongs.
SakuraBot demonstrating perfectly why that forward medium kick is a decent neutral game button.
Oops, I lose a point. I lose a point again. Alright. So I think I am about Sakura'd out with Cammy, so I'm going to try this a little bit with Kareen. And then we can stop for the evening. And this will be interesting for me. Oops. I'm not used to that still. This will be interesting for me in various ways, because I think what Karine is capable of doing here is possibly a little bit different against Sakura, or maybe it's just that my inputs need a little touch-up on my own. But we'll have a look at that now. Not to mention they've changed what my crush counter buttons even are. Interestingly, I believe it allows me to use the same button now for both. Oof, the anti-air troubles I have, though. So I think for the basic one at least, not the V-triggered one, just a normal combo is the way to go. But for the crush counterable ones, life is interesting. Because while they gave Karine this glorious new stand heavy punch crush counter, it seems that they do not allow her to combo normally off of it, and it will always put the opponent into an aerial reel. So I have quite a bit to explore and practice on with SakuraBot myself in this regard as well. She has dash up throw now. How horrifying. So despite being my crush counter button now, or one of them, stand heavy punch is for me the correct answer to the non and crush counterable versions, and not to the crush counterable version. I'm gonna have fun getting that through my head.
Yeah, the rhythm for her dash is definitely different.
Mm-hmm.
In a good way, I think. It does make her a little more oppressive.
Indeed.
And so if you don't play the neutral game with her and get your spacing correct, you definitely get a lot more damage.
It definitely makes her a little bit more of a defensive threat. Nothing like cancels off of that, but there's always other options. That crush counter is glorious. I'm going to appreciate it. And probably hate it. Depending on what side of it I'm on. So on that note, with the extremely large amount of practice I have left to do with SakuraBot, I will say goodnight to you all. So we will be putting up SakuraBot on our website, 2-mk.org/bots, probably in the next 15 to 20 minutes as we go and do that right after stream. So if you want to take a look for yourself, put her in, take advantage of the free Sakura week, this first week of Arcade Edition, you can do that to get a little experience yourself. So hopefully this has been a little informative, or will at least make it easier for you to get what you need off of SakuraBot. And have a nice evening. Back to main menu for myself to make sure I save all of my inputs. So thanks for stopping by.
This is Just Fine.
And of course, Kanzuki Dynasty.
Signing out.